I'm Joe Lample. Today we'll be planting and learning about a vegetable, a salad green, and an herb. This trio of plants consists of Swiss chard, curly endive, and salad burnet. If you've never planted any of these, you're in for a pleasant surprise. Swiss chard is a jack of all trades. Its leaves can be eaten in a salad or can be cooked up as a pot of greens. There are ordinary varieties with white stalks and special varieties with a dizzy array of brightly colored stalks. Although it's considered a cool weather crop, it will often keep on producing right through summer. Curly endive is considered a gourmet green. Its tightly crinkled leaves add a special pizzazz to a salad, and its spicy taste is hard to replicate. Endive can easily be grown from seed for a fraction of the grocery store price. Burnet is a wonderful herb that deserves to be more widely grown. It looks a bit like parsley, but has a refreshing cucumber taste. Burnet is one of the few herbs that can be grown in partial shade. Let's start with the Swiss chard. Chard is actually a beet that's been cultivated over the years so that it no longer has that large beet-like root. Now chard is grown for its edible foliage, which tastes like a cross between beets and spinach. And you might have heard chard referred to as leaf beet or beet spinach. I started by checking the soil temperature in my garden. The seeds of Swiss chard can be direct sown in the garden several weeks before the last spring frost, as long as the soil temperature is at least 50 degrees. The ideal range is 60 to 65 degrees. My soil was 60. Next, I added compost and manure to the top of my garden bed and turned them in with a fork. Swiss chard will grow in poor soil, but it will thrive if given some extra nitrogen. So I'm adding some blood meal. Now I know that sounds a bit grim, but really it's just a natural organic source of nitrogen that releases quickly into the soil. I work the blood meal into the soil and then smooth the soil with a rake. To plant the seed, I used a device called a planting board. I used the V-shaped edge of the board to make a narrow furrow about a ½ inch deep. Next, I placed the board along the ground and used the smaller notches of the board as a planting guide. A planting board like this is an old-fashioned tool that's easy to make. This one happens to be 6 feet long, but you could cut it to any size you like. To make this one, I used a tape measure to make marks every 3 inches, and then I used a jigsaw to cut the notches out. By dropping the seed in every third notch, I ended up with a row of evenly spaced seeds, each 9 inches apart. For larger seeds, I might have used every fourth notch to give the seeds 12-inch spacing. The planting board made the work quick and neat. I'm planting 3 different varieties, and despite their differences, they all grow fairly quickly, reaching their full mature size in about 60 days. The first variety I planted is an old-time favorite called Ford Hook Giant. It has pale greenish-white stalks and large, thickly textured leaves. The second variety is called Perpetual. It's very resistant to heat, so it's one of the best varieties to plant if you live in a warm climate. It has thin stalks and smooth leaves that closely resemble spinach. The third variety is Bright Lights. Its stems are a knockout mix of red, yellow, orange, purple, and white, while its green and burgundy leaves are mild and flavorful. I just covered my seeds with a ½ inch of a light seed starting mix, and now I'm misting the bed to get the growing process started. Swiss chard can take anywhere from 5 days to almost 15 days to germinate. These seeds germinated in 6 days. When the seedlings were about 2 inches tall, I thinned them by using scissors and cutting out the extra plants, leaving 9 to 12 inches between the remaining seedlings. I'll keep this chard weeded and watered, and in a few weeks I'll have all the Swiss chard I can eat. Coming up next, 2 crops that instantly turn any salad into a gourmet treat, plus a primer on starting seeds indoors so you can get an early jump on the season. The garden. Today I'm planting a trio of interesting plants. I've already planted Swiss chard, and now I'm ready to tackle curly endive and burnet. Curly endive is a gourmet salad green with a distinctive texture and a sharp taste. Curly endive is often called chicory. That's because it's a member of the chicory family, which includes the chicory root used in New Orleans-style coffee and the common dandelion, which we tend to treat as a weed. Curly endive is also very closely related to another endive that you often see in grocery stores. Although the spelling is the same, these smooth-leafed heads are pronounced endive, and the curly-leafed varieties that we're growing are pronounced endive. Curly endive is a cool season crop. Gardeners in the deep south grow it as a winter green. Other climates, you start it in the fall or the spring. Now you can sow endive directly into the garden. But to get an early jump on the season, I'll start my seeds indoors and then move them out to the garden about 2 weeks before the last expected frost. I used plastic 6-pack cell trays and filled each cell with sterile seed starting mix. I moistened the mix with water and added 2 seeds to each cell. To make handling the seeds easy, I tore the seed pack in half, making the pack into a V shape and lightly tapped the pack so that 1 or 2 seeds dropped out at a time. Next, I put about 1/8 of an inch of the starting mix over the seeds and moistened the soil again. Then I placed a clear plastic cover over the tray to trap the moisture and keep the humidity level high. For endive seeds to germinate well and to grow into healthy seedlings, the soil temperature needs to be between 55 and 70 degrees. So a soil temperature probe like this works well. And if things get too hot or too cold, you can make adjustments. The seeds germinated in about 10 days. My grow light is on a timer, and I set the timer so the lights would stay on about 16 hours a day, which is necessary for the seedlings to develop properly. A grow light like this that's adjustable is a really great tool when you're starting seeds indoors. And as the plants grow up, you can raise the light accordingly. Now, if you don't have a light like this, you can try starting your seeds on a sunny windowsill. But on cloudy days and in northern climates, the sunlight is rarely strong enough for the seedlings to get off to a really good start. And in those cases, with insufficient light, the seedlings can become spindly and easily flop over. Once seedlings get a few real leaves on them, they can benefit from fertilizer to grow strong and healthy. I like to use an all-purpose water-soluble fertilizer. I mix it in half strength and use it once a week when I water the plants. Plants that have been growing inside need to be exposed to the outside gradually over time through a process known as hardening off. And I'm doing that to these endive seedlings. I'll leave these out in the shade for a few hours and then I'll take them back inside. But each day over the next week, I'll leave them out for a little longer, exposing them to more sunlight each time. By the end of the week, they'll be ready to go in the ground. When they were 6 weeks old and well hardened off, the seedlings were ready for the garden. Endive grows best in soils with lots of organic matter, so I prepared the bed by adding a thick layer of compost on top of the soil and then working it in. I also mixed in a cup of 10-10-10 fertilizer to give the plants the nutrients they'll need. I raked out the soil and then began to plant. Using my planting board for spacing, I dug a small hole with my hand and then gently removed the seedling from its cell. I set the plants at the same depth they were growing indoors and placed them 12 inches apart. These plants all looked great coming right out of their cell packs, but now to get them established in the bed more quickly, I'm adding some water-soluble fertilizer as I water them in. Now that'll give these plants an extra boost that they need, and then it will be good for both of the varieties. The first variety I'm planting, Neos, has extra frilly leaves. The leaves are a medium green on the outside, but are a paler creamy white color in the center. It grows 12 to 14 inches tall and matures in 75 to 85 days after planting. The second variety I'm planting, Frizz E, also has fine-toothed leaves that move from green on the outer part to cream-colored in the interior of the head. It matures in 65 to 75 days. Both Neos and Frizz E are relatively heat-tolerant. Now that the endive is all watered in, it's time to plant Burnet. And if you haven't heard of salad Burnet, you're not alone. It's an underappreciated and underutilized perennial, but I have a feeling it will become much more trendy as people realize how great it tastes and how easy it is to grow. Burnet, or salad Burnet as it's sometimes called, is an attractive perennial herb. It has small rounded leaves that have a fresh cucumbery taste. The leaves can be tossed in salads, used as a seasoning, or enjoyed steeped in hot water to make a tea. Burnet grows about 24 inches tall and bears crimson-colored flowers in the summer. Whether you buy your seedlings from a nursery or start your own, chances are you'll have several seedlings growing in each cell. Now you could thin these out before you plant, thin them out when you plant, or thin them out after you plant, which is what I like to do with tender seedlings like this. It gives me a chance to see which plants get the most established, and then I can thin out the rest. I had started some Burnet seeds indoors 6 weeks ago and hardened off the seedlings, just like I did with the endive. Just like endive, Burnet does best with lots of organic matter and well-drained soil, so I transplanted the seedlings into the same bed as the endive. For spacing, I allowed 1 foot in all directions around each plant. On step-by-step directions on what I've done so far, visit our website, DIYnetwork.com. If you like, you can direct sow Burnet directly into the garden. Burnet grows well from seed, so it's simply a matter of personal preference. But in either case, be sure you water the plants well until they're established, and then sit back and enjoy. Coming up next, don't get burned. We'll see the damage that too much fertilizer can cause. Fresh from the garden, I'm Joe Lample. I've planted salad Burnet, curly endive, and Swiss chard, a trio of attractive vegetables. Let's see how they're doing. I sowed the Swiss chard seeds into the garden 8 weeks ago. I watered and mulched them, and now the leaves are maturing, and some are almost a foot tall. The Bright Lights variety in particular is a real attention getter with its neon-colored stalks. Swiss chard is an easy-growing vegetable that's not too demanding, and in fact, it'll even grow in poor soil, but it really takes off if it's given some pampering, and I've been helping mine along with an occasional dose of compost tea. All plants, but especially those that are grown for their leafy greens, need plenty of nitrogen. I mixed some blood meal into the soil before I planted the chard to give the seedlings a nitrogen boost. Then, when the chard had been up and growing for a month, I started watering with compost tea. Compost tea is a liquid compost solution that contains nitrogen. But more important, compost tea is rich in microbes that improve the soil and plant's ability to utilize nitrogen. Later in the Homegrown Hint, I'll show you how to make your own compost tea. It's a little extra work, but it's well worth the effort for the results that you get. Now, if you don't want to deal with compost tea, I'll show you a way that you can give your chard a mid-season boost with a technique called side dressing. Side dressing is a gardening term for putting fertilizer in a narrow band next to a row of plants. I used the diamond-shaped head of this short hoe to make a 1-inch furrow about 6 inches from the base of the chard and sprinkled blood meal in the furrow. I covered the blood meal with soil to keep it from washing away in the next rain. Putting the fertilizer below the soil and to the side of the plant gets it right in the target zone of the roots. If you don't have blood meal, you can use any nitrogen-rich fertilizer, but be sure to read the instructions first, because too much fertilizer can be far worse than not enough. And to illustrate the point, I'll apply some extra 10-10-10 to the base of this plant, and it won't take long to see the damage that can occur. It's been a few weeks since I started the experiment of applying too much fertilizer to this plant, but now the results are really apparent. And the plant really looks like it's melted away and literally burned in the center, and that's because I put a lot of the extra fertilizer right into the heart of the plant. So the moral of the story really is true. Too little fertilizer is far better than too much. Swiss chard technically matures about 3 months after planting, but most folks think chard is best if harvested when the leaves are not quite full grown. To harvest, cut off the outer leaves about 1 inch above the ground. Chard is a cut-and-come-again vegetable. As you cut off the outer leaves, the inner leaves will continue to grow. This allows for a long period of harvest. In many climates, harvest will begin in spring and continue into late fall or even winter. The only trick is to avoid cutting into the growing bud in the center of the leaves. If this is damaged, the chard will quit producing. In cool weather, chard leaves have a sweet, mild flavor. But in the summertime, these leaves can get bitter, but it's only a temporary condition, because when cool weather returns again, the new foliage is sweet. If you find that your leaves are bitter when it's hot, just cut that foliage off and toss it in the compost pile. Endive can be harvested just like chard, by pulling or cutting off some of the outer leaves. But endive also bolts or goes to seed if temperatures get too hot. So if it's grown in the spring, it's usually harvested all at once to make room for summer crops. Endive leaves that are blanched or kept away from the sun for a short period have a milder taste than unblanched endive. The Neos and Frizzy varieties I planted are considered self-blanching because the leaves grow together so tightly that the inner portion is naturally shielded from the sun. In fact, you can see how the inner leaves are blanched or pale looking. But some gardeners like to ensure the mild taste by tying up the heads with a loose rubber band for 5 days before the endive is harvested. I don't find it necessary, but the option's there. Burnet is another cut and come again plant, so you can cut as often as you like and the plant will keep on producing. And like chard, it has a long harvest period. Now the only problem is that in the summer the foliage might get bitter, and that's really not a problem because you just cut it all back, and then in the fall it produces fresh new foliage that has that distinctive cucumbery taste. When we come back, a special homegrown hint. We'll become brewmeisters, creating a special concoction that will take your garden to new heights. Welcome back. Earlier we gave this Swiss chard a mid-season boost with compost tea. Compost tea is an age-old remedy, but in the last few years technology has given it a new twist. Compost tea is an organic soil supplement that's made by steeping compost in water. The old-fashioned way to make compost tea was to fill an old stocking or cheesecloth with compost and soak it overnight in a bucket of water. But the newer and better way to make compost tea involves aerating the solution while it steeps. This makes an aerobic or oxygenated brew that's full of beneficial microbes, those tiny little living organisms that are so important to our garden's health. You can buy a compost brewer or you can make your own. I bought these parts in an aquarium supply store and I'm ready to put them together. I started with a 5-gallon bucket and a 5-gallon aquarium pump. I hooked up a length of plastic tubing to the pump and attached the other end of the tubing to this gang valve. I slipped the gang valve over the side of the bucket. Next, I attached 3 more pieces of plastic tubing to the gang valve, making sure that these 3 pieces were long enough to reach the bottom of the bucket. To finish, I attached a small air stone or bubbler to the end of each of the 3 pieces of tubing. Making the compost brewer was simple enough, but now comes the fun part, making your first batch of compost tea. And you need 4 items: finished compost, dechlorinated water, unsulfured molasses, and cheesecloth. First, fill the cheesecloth with enough compost to fill 4 inches of the bottom of the bucket. If you have a good compost pile, use some of your own compost. Otherwise, purchase bagged compost at your garden center. Place the compost into the bucket, making sure the 3 air stones are covered with the compost, then pour your dechlorinated water into the brewer, leaving a few inches of extra space at the top. If you're using chlorinated tap water, let it sit out overnight so that the chlorine can evaporate into the air. Add about a half a cup of unsulfured molasses. The molasses will feed the bacteria in the compost and activate the brew. Next, plug in the pump and turn it on. The brew should take 2 or 3 days before it's ready, and I'll check it so often to make sure it's working properly. The brew should also have a pleasant sweet odor. When the tea was ready, I turned off the air pump. You can use the tea as a soil drench or as a foliar spray. To use as a foliar spray, you first need to strain the tea. Pour the liquid portion through a coffee filter into a sprayer. Then use the hand sprayer to apply to the leaves of any of your plants that need a boost. I also like to use compost tea as a soil drench, thoroughly saturating the roots of the plants. There's millions of beneficial microorganisms in compost tea that go to work immediately once they make their way into the soil to help improve the vigor and health of the plants. And there's lots of scientific evidence to support that, but I can tell you firsthand it really works well. If you'd like to make your own brew system at home, then check out our website at DIYnetwork.com. There you'll find step-by-step instructions as well as lots of other gardening information. That's it for today, but I'll see you back here next time on Fresh from the Garden.